My stepdaughter threw hot coffee at me when I refused to give her my credit card. She said I was a wicked man and will never earn her respect. When I confronted her, her mom, my wife, backed her and called me an irresponsible old man. What happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Sam Ross from Ohio. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I've always believed that love was something you earned over time, not something you were entitled to. That belief guided me when I married Lorraine. She was vibrant, warm in public, and sharp in private. Too sharp sometimes, but I chalked it up to stress. We were both older, both with pasts, and I was just grateful someone like her would even look my way after the loneliness of my divorce. The house was mine, paid off years before we met, but I invited her and her daughter in like it was a gift I'd been saving just for them. I told myself I was building something, a new chapter, a fresh start. But sometimes, kindness becomes a debt you never agreed to owe. Her daughter, Mariah, was 17 when I met her. Already angry at the world, already determined not to like me. I understood. I was the intruder, the new man taking up space in a family that had once belonged to someone else. Her father wasn't around, but he was a hero in her mind, gone just enough to stay perfect. I, on the other hand, was just present enough to become the villain. I tried to win her over. I took her to get her learner's permit. I paid for tutoring when her grades slipped. I even turned a blind eye when she started treating the house like a hotel and me like the help. Lorraine always said, she just needs time. And I gave her time. Years of it. There were moments when I thought things might be softening between us. A shared joke at dinner, a thank you murmured when I handed her some cash for a school event, even a rare smile. But they never lasted. The next week, she'd snap at me for something as small as asking her to take her dishes to the sink. And Lorraine? She'd just shrug, pour herself another glass of wine, and change the subject. I kept hoping it was just a phase, that eventually, I'd be accepted. But every time I felt the door to connection creak open, it slammed shut twice as hard. My patience, once a strength, became a prison I had no idea I was locking myself into. Money became the unspoken battlefield. Mariah saw me as a walking ATM, never outright rude when she wanted something, just cool and transactional. Can I have your card? I need stuff for school. No, please. Never thank you. Just demands framed as needs, delivered with the entitled tone of someone who had never earned anything in her life, but always expected it. Lorraine never intervened. Sometimes she even encouraged it, saying things like, "It's not a big deal, she's your daughter now." But she wasn't. She never wanted to be. I was funding a life I wasn't welcome in, footing bills for people who saw me as nothing more than a means to their end. I'd sit on the back porch at night, the only place I felt truly alone, and think about what I'd become. A man displaced in his own home. I missed having conversations where I didn't have to watch my tone. I missed being thanked. I missed the quiet dignity of being seen as a partner, not just a provider. I tried to talk to Lorraine once about how I was feeling, how the coldness from Mariah was getting to me, how I felt dismissed in my own house. She waved it off like it was nothing. "You're too sensitive," she said, without even looking up from her phone. Teenagers are like that. Grow a thicker skin. It stung more than I admitted. Not because of the words, but because of the ease with which she said them. As if my pain was inconvenient, my presence optional. Still I stayed. I kept paying the mortgage, taking care of the lawn, fixing what broke. I told myself it would be worse if I left. That I'd be the bad guy. That maybe, one day, they'd look back and realize I tried. But deep down, I knew, respect doesn't grow where resentment is watered. And in that house, resentment was blooming in every corner. I was the outsider funding their comfort, slowly erasing myself in the process. Something had to give. I just didn't know it would come so violently. It was a Saturday morning like any other, overcast, quiet, that kind of thick air that makes you feel like something's about to happen. I'd woken up early, as usual. Old habits don't die with age, they just sharpen. I'd made myself a cup of coffee, the good kind, The beans I kept hidden in the back of the pantry because Mariah once poured a whole bag into a drip machine and left the kitchen looking like a murder scene of grounds and bitterness. Lorraine was still upstairs, probably scrolling through her phone, wrapped in that silk robe I bought her for our second anniversary. I remember standing at the sink, watching the steam rise from my mug, and for a moment, I imagined a different life. One where peace was the default, not something I had to earn with silence and patience. That illusion lasted exactly 8 minutes. Mariah came down the stairs like a storm, loud, careless, and already annoyed. She had her phone in one hand, the other adjusting her sweatshirt, and the first thing she said wasn't good morning or hello, but, "Where's your credit card?" No greeting, no explanation. Just an order delivered with the confidence of someone who'd been told too many times that everything would be taken care of. I turned to face her slowly, setting my mug down. "Why do you need it?" I asked, my tone neutral but firm. I'd learned to speak to her like I was approaching a skittish animal. Too soft, and she'd ignore you. Too strong, and she'd bite. She rolled her eyes so hard I swear I heard it. "I have to order stuff for school. Supplies. It's urgent." I'd heard this line before. Last time it was school supplies. It turned out to be a $200 Sephora order and some wireless earbuds. "What kind of supplies?" I asked, already knowing this would not go well. Her jaw tightened. "Why do you always make things difficult? Just give me the card. You're not broke." That's when something in me shifted. A slow, cold turn. Maybe it was the way she said it, like my only worth was in plastic and credit limits. Or maybe I was just tired. Bone deep tired. "No," I said simply. "Not today." She blinked, clearly stunned, like I'd just broken some unspoken family code. Then the switch flipped. "You're such a selfish old man," she snapped, her voice rising. "All you care about is your money. No wonder nobody respects you. You'll die alone, and no one will care." I didn't respond right away. Her words hit, sure, but not in the way she expected. They didn't hurt me. They confirmed everything I'd suspected for years. She didn't just dislike me. She despised me. Saw me as an obstacle, a wallet with legs, someone she could humiliate without consequence. I took a breath, steadying myself. "Mariah," I said quietly, "I've given a lot to this family, including you. But respect isn't something I owe you. It's something you earn. And right now, you haven't earned a damn thing." The silence after that felt volcanic, thick, trembling, ready to erupt. And then it happened. She picked up my mug, still half full of coffee, and with a rage I didn't know a teenager could carry, she hurled it at me. The cup hit my shoulder, shattered, and hot coffee splashed across my chest and neck. The heat stung, but not as much as the realization that this wasn't just disrespect, it was war. I stumbled back, more out of shock than pain. "Are you out of your mind?" I shouted, my voice shaking. She just stood there, defiant, breathing hard like she was proud of what she'd done. The clatter brought Lorraine downstairs, her robe flowing, mascara smudged under tired eyes. "What the hell is going on?" she asked, looking between us. I pointed at the broken mug, at the mess. "Your daughter just threw hot coffee at me because I wouldn't give her my credit card." Mariah crossed her arms and glared. "He's lying. He provoked me." I expected Lorraine to at least ask if I was okay, to check if I was burned, to show some flicker of concern. But she didn't. She looked at me like I was the problem, her face twisting into something cold and unrecognizable. "You're such an irresponsible old man," she snapped. "You don't know how to handle teenagers. You're always looking for a fight." I stared at her, speechless. My shirt was soaked, my skin burning, and she was siding with the person who assaulted me like I was the one out of line. "You're defending her?" I asked, not really needing the answer. "She's my daughter," she said flatly. What did you expect? That was it. The end. Not a bang, not a breakdown, just that sentence. What did you expect? I stood there, wet and shaking, looking at two people who saw me as disposable, who'd taken my kindness and twisted it into weakness, who'd turned my home into a battleground and me into the enemy. I didn't say another word. I went upstairs, changed into dry clothes, packed a small duffel bag, and walked out the front door. Lorraine shouted something behind me. I didn't hear it. Didn't want to. I drove to a motel 15 minutes away and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my hands like they belonged to someone else. I'd been betrayed before, but never like this. Never by the people I let into my home, into my heart. I thought about going back, about trying to fix it. But deep down, I knew this wasn't something broken. It was something rotten. And rot doesn't get repaired. It gets cut out. I didn't sleep that night. The motel room was clean enough, but it felt sterile, blank walls, stiff sheets, and an air conditioner that rattled like it was trying to escape the wall. But it wasn't the noise that kept me up. It was the echo of her words. You'll die alone, and no one will care. I must have heard them 100 times in my head before the sun came up, each time more venomous than the last. I'd lived long enough to develop a thick skin, or so I thought. But those words didn't just scratch. They dug deep, tapping into something raw and vulnerable that I hadn't realized still existed in me. Maybe it wasn't the insult itself, but who it came from. A child I had tried to love, a woman I had trusted, and a house I had filled with warmth, now emptied by fire and silence. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror around 6 a.m., rubbing the red patch on my collarbone where the coffee had splashed. The skin was angry and tender, but it would heal. It was the betrayal that blistered deeper. I kept asking myself what I had done wrong. Where had I misstepped? Was I too strict? Too inflexible? Had I been unkind without realizing it? But every time I turned those questions over, the same answer emerged. I had shown up. I had tried. Again and again. And in the end, trying didn't count. I was never what they wanted me to be. I was the placeholder. The man who paid for everything and got nothing in return. Somewhere along the way, I had mistaken tolerance for love and silence for peace. By noon, I was in my truck, parked outside a diner I used to visit when I was single. I hadn't been there in years. The waitress, a woman named Carol, recognized me and offered a polite smile but didn't pry. I ordered a black coffee, forcing myself to swallow the irony, and sat there for a long time. I looked around at the families chatting, the laughter spilling from booths, the clatter of forks on plates. I used to think scenes like that were within reach, that with enough effort, I could build that kind of life with Lorraine and Mariah. But what I had built instead was a stage for someone else's resentment. And I was done pretending I didn't see it. That was the moment I decided. Not out of spite or anger, but from clarity. I wasn't going back. Not to that house, not to those arguments, not to that version of myself that kept shrinking to fit into other people's comfort. I pulled out my phone, dialed the number of my real estate lawyer, and said 8 words I never imagined myself saying. I want to sell the house. Immediately. No delays. He paused, probably sensing the weight behind the words, and said, Okay, we'll start the process. Are you sure? I was more than sure. I was done. I spent the next few days at the motel, alternating between long walks and longer phone calls. I had to untangle the life I'd built like pulling nails out of old wood. Bank accounts, insurance policies, utility bills, all in my name. Lorraine had taken advantage of my generosity for years, but she had no stake in the property. I'd been cautious, if not entirely aware of how wise that caution would turn out to be. Legally, she had no claim. Emotionally, she'd already walked away long before I packed my bag. I forwarded all relevant notices to her through my attorney. No calls, no texts, just silence. The backlash came fast and loud. First through voicemail, then emails, then posts on social media. Lorraine called me a coward. Mariah posted a story calling me a manipulative, toxic abuser who destroyed their lives for fun. The language was cruel, but the part that struck me most was the total lack of accountability. There was no, maybe we went too far, no hint of regret. Just blame, full, unfiltered, and heavy. It confirmed what I'd suspected for years. I was never a member of their family. I was a resource. And when resources cut off, they're discarded like broken appliances. But even through the noise, I felt a strange calm settling in. Not happiness, not yet, but something firmer than anger. Something solid. Like I'd finally stopped drowning in someone else's storm. For the first time in years, I had a quiet I didn't have to earn by biting my tongue. I could breathe in my own space, drink coffee in peace, read a book without wondering what accusation or demand would be hurled at me next. It was strange how absence could feel like freedom. How the same silence that once terrified me now felt like a soft blanket over a raw wound. I visited the house once, just before the sale closed. I parked across the street, engine running, and stared at the windows. The curtains were drawn. The lawn, which I used to mow like clockwork, was overgrown. A broken tricycle lay near the front steps, probably a neighbor's kid. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. That house wasn't mine anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. I just wanted to see it one last time, not as a home, but as a chapter, one I was finally ready to close. As I drove away, I didn't feel triumphant. There was no swelling music, no fist pump of justice. Just a deep, settling relief. Like pulling a splinter out after years of pain you'd gotten used to. I had left behind two people who would never see me for who I was. And I was finally ready to stop waiting for them to try. The papers came through on a Thursday afternoon, thick with legal phrasing and finality. I sat at the desk in the small apartment I'd rented downtown. Nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom with clean walls and no history, and read every word slowly, even though I already knew what they said. The house was sold. The funds had cleared. The chapter was closed in the eyes of the law. I didn't pop champagne or even call a friend. I just stared at the closing statement until my eyes blurred, then signed the last document with a pen I'd borrowed from the leasing office. It was done. Finished. And yet, the moment didn't feel celebratory. It felt surgical, precise, clean, and a little cold. I'd moved out weeks before the sale, but it wasn't until that document was signed that the weight truly shifted. It was like I'd been carrying a ghost on my back, and now, suddenly, it had vanished. No more waiting for the phone to ring with some new request. No more glancing at text with dread. No more pretending. I was alone, but for the first time in years, it wasn't lonely. It was just quiet. And that quiet was sacred. I didn't owe it to anyone. I didn't have to explain it or defend it. It was mine. Of course, Lorraine and Mariah didn't go quietly. The emails turned from accusatory to pleading, then back to venomous again. How could you do this to us? Lorraine wrote in one message. We gave you our lives. That line stuck with me, not because it was true, but because of how wrong it was. They hadn't given me anything. I had given and given, until I was hollowed out, and still, it wasn't enough. The audacity to frame my exit as a betrayal, as if I'd abandoned something sacred, was almost laughable. They weren't mourning the loss of me. They were mourning the loss of control. And that wasn't grief. That was ego. Mariah, for her part, doubled down. She messaged me from a new number after I blocked the first, demanding money she claimed I owed her for emotional distress. She even threatened to involve a lawyer. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Every word would be twisted, every silence used as proof of guilt. I had learned that lesson too many times. Eventually, the messages slowed. The rage sputtered out like a dying engine. And in its place came silence. Not peace, exactly, but a sort of uneasy truce between past and present. I spent a lot of time walking those weeks. Down city sidewalks, through quiet parks, past old buildings with stories etched into their bricks. It gave me time to think, to process, to shed the skin of the man I had been in that house. I thought about the version of myself who had tried so hard to be accepted, who bought gifts, planned family dinners, laughed at jokes that cut too deep. That man was gone now, and in his place stood someone leaner, sharper, maybe a little colder, but whole. Boundaries have a way of hardening you, but they also protect what's left inside. And I was determined to protect what little self-respect I still carried. It wasn't all clean lines and confident decisions, though. There were nights when I doubted myself, when I'd wake up in a cold sweat, wondering if I'd overreacted. If maybe, just maybe, I should have stayed and fought harder. But then I'd remember the way Mariah's face looked when she hurled that mug at me. Not like someone having a tantrum, but like someone who meant to hurt. And I'd remember Lorraine, arms crossed, calling me an irresponsible old man without blinking. Those weren't words said in anger. They were truths they'd been holding for years, finally spoken aloud. That kind of clarity doesn't get blurred with time. It just sharpens. Eventually, the apartment started to feel like mine. I hung a few photos. Nothing of them, just landscapes, old travel snapshots, memories from before. I bought a second-hand armchair that creaked just right, the kind you could sink into and forget the world for a while. I found a rhythm, coffee at sunrise, a walk before noon, late-night radio murmuring through the walls. It wasn't glamorous, but it was peaceful. And peace, I was learning, is a kind of wealth most people spend their whole lives chasing. One afternoon, I got a call from a mutual friend. Doug, a guy I used to golf with before everything turned sour. He'd heard through the grapevine what happened and wanted to meet for lunch. I hesitated but agreed. We met at a quiet diner, the kind with checkered floors and waitresses who called you hon. Doug looked older than I remembered, more tired. We talked about sports, the weather, nothing meaningful, until the check came. Then he leaned in and said, "Lorraine's been telling people you snapped, that you lost it, that you were unstable." I didn't flinch. I'd expected worse. "I'm sure she has," I said. He nodded, his eyes studying mine. "But I don't believe it. You look better now than you did then." I just smiled. "I am better." We shook hands outside, and as I walked back to my apartment, I realized something had shifted again. The past wasn't just behind me, it was dissolving, losing its grip. I wasn't the man who had left. I was the man who had survived leaving, and that made all the difference. It had been 3 months since I left, and still, the shadows found their way in. Not loud anymore, not screaming accusations or venomous texts, but quieter, more insidious. A scent in a grocery aisle that reminded me of Lorraine's perfume. A teenage girl's voice that sounded just enough like Mariah to make me turn my head. I'd built a life around absence now, and yet, the ghosts of that house wandered through my days like they still had keys. I didn't invite them. I didn't acknowledge them. But they came anyway, with their memories and muttered echoes of "you'll die alone." I thought I was done unpacking the weight of what happened, but grief is a trickster. It doesn't follow rules or timelines. Some days I'd wake up feeling clean, ready. Other days, I'd catch myself staring at my phone, half expecting some kind of apology to show up, even though I knew it never would. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't just bruise your trust in others, it chips away at your belief that you're worth more. Even when you know better. Even when you stand firm. One rainy morning, I stopped by a hardware store on the edge of town, one of those old, locally owned places where the floors creak and every employee knows the aisles by heart. I was looking for new fixtures for the kitchen sink in my apartment, trying to make the place more like home, when I heard a familiar voice say my name. I turned slowly, half expecting a ghost, but it was real. Yvonne, Lorraine's old friend from her book club. She looked surprised, but not unfriendly. We chatted politely, cautiously, like two people navigating a minefield. She asked how I was doing. I said I was fine. She nodded slowly, then said, "I always wondered how long you'd hold on." That sentence stopped me cold. I looked at her, and something in her eyes told me she wasn't being cruel. She was being honest. "What do you mean?" I asked. She sighed, fiddling with the strap of her purse. "Lorraine, she wasn't always kind. We used to talk about you. Not kindly. Not to your face, of course, but behind your back. She'd say you were boring, too controlling, old-fashioned. That she only stayed because of the house, the stability." Mariah picked up on it early. I swallowed hard. It shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. Not because I thought better of Lorraine, but because I'd convinced myself I imagined the contempt. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because you look freer than I've ever seen you, and I thought you deserved to know it wasn't your fault." I didn't have words for that. I just nodded, thanked her, and walked out with a wrench I didn't really need. Her words clung to me the rest of the day, not because they were cruel, but because they validated everything I had spent years trying to deny. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I had been tolerated, not loved. And knowing that didn't hurt, it freed me. It cut the last invisible thread still tying me to them. That night, I pulled out a box I hadn't touched since moving. Photos, cards, small things I had stuffed away in the rush to escape. I laid them out on the table. Our wedding photo, Lorraine in white with that guarded smile. A birthday card Mariah had signed with just her name, no message. A receipt from the first family trip we took together, the one where they fought the whole time, and I pretended not to notice. I stared at them for a long while, then picked each one up, quietly thanking it for the lesson it gave me. Then I fed every piece into the fireplace. The paper curled and blackened, disappearing into ash and warmth. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about closure. It was about release, about telling myself, this chapter is over, and it does not define me. The flames whispered their approval, And for the first time in a long time, I felt still, whole. In the weeks that followed, I found myself more open. A neighbor invited me to a community barbecue, and I went. A woman at the library asked if I wanted to join a book discussion group, and I said yes. I started to build something not to replace what I'd lost, but to prove to myself that life didn't end when a door slammed shut. Sometimes, the lock clicking behind you is the best sound you'll ever hear. I still thought about Mariah sometimes. Not with anger, just curiosity. What kind of woman would she grow into? Would she ever see herself clearly? Would she remember the man who stood in her corner even when she spat in his face? Maybe. Maybe not. That part wasn't mine to write. My story had moved on, and I owed it to myself to follow. One evening, as I sat on the balcony watching the city lights blink on like little confessions, I thought about all the ways we teach people how to treat us. How long I'd allowed silence to be mistaken for agreement. I used to think setting boundaries meant shutting people out. Now I knew it meant finally letting myself in. The day I returned to the overlook where I'd proposed to Lorraine, the wind was sharp but not cruel. It was the kind of wind that cleared your head, not the kind that knocked you over. The overlook itself hadn't changed. The same rusted railing, the same patch of wildflowers growing stubbornly through the cracks in the pavement. I hadn't been back since that day 8 years ago, when I knelt down on one knee and asked her to be my wife. She said yes with a kind of hesitation that I mistook for surprise. I see it now, plain as daylight. Back then, I only saw what I wanted to see. That was the trouble with me. I loved with my eyes half closed. I stood there for a long while, hands in my coat pockets, staring out at the horizon like it owed me an answer. I wasn't angry anymore. Not bitter. Just done. There's a kind of peace that comes when you stop trying to rewrite the past. I used to think closure came from confrontation, from making someone understand the pain they caused. But I learned the hard way. Some people don't have the capacity for understanding. Some people would rather burn you down than face their own reflection. And you can't force growth where there's no soil. I thought about writing Lorraine a letter once. Not to get back together, not even to demand accountability, just to lay it all out. The pain, the confusion, the long nights wondering if I was the problem. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't know her that clarity. She had been present for every moment that tore me down. She'd watched it all unfold and did nothing but tighten the noose. What could a letter say that my absence hadn't already screamed? I didn't need to remind her of what she'd done. I needed to remind myself that walking away was the best thing I ever did. I left the overlook without saying goodbye, because some places don't deserve ceremony. I drove back through neighborhoods I used to know, past the grocery store where Mariah once threw a tantrum because I wouldn't buy her designer headphones, past the gas station where Lorraine once called me controlling because I asked her to stick to our budget. These were small memories, but sharp. They used to haunt me. Now they just pass by like billboards on a long highway, seen, registered, forgotten. Back at the apartment, I poured myself a glass of water and stood at the window, watching the light spill across the buildings like melted gold. It wasn't the life I'd imagined, not the retirement dream they sell in magazines. But it was mine, built with hard decisions, painful truths, and the kind of growth that doesn't show up in photo albums. I had no one to impress anymore. No roles to perform. Just one man, living honestly and sleeping through the night for the first time in years. The next day, I bought a journal. A real one, with thick pages and a leather cover that smelled like old books. I started writing, not to make sense of what had happened, but to remind myself of who I was without them. I wrote about the mornings that came without dread. The quiet relief of walking into a kitchen that didn't feel like enemy territory. The small triumph of repairing the kitchen sink alone, without being told I was doing it wrong. These were victories no one else would clap for, but they were mine. Hard-won and real. Sometimes, I'd get curious and look them up. Lorraine had gone back to her maiden name online. Mariah had started a podcast, something about empowerment and unlearning toxic family dynamics. The irony didn't sting. It made me smile. Let them have their narratives. Let them spin their stories for whoever would listen. I had no desire to correct them. Because I didn't need to be the hero in anyone's version of events. I just needed to be the truth in my own. One morning, I passed a father and daughter on the street. He was helping her balance on a scooter, his hand steady at her back. She giggled, wobbling, and he said, "It's okay. I've got you." That simple phrase stopped me in my tracks. I remembered how many times I'd said that, or tried to mean it, to Mariah. How many times I'd reached out only to be slapped away. But the difference now was, I no longer blamed myself for the rejection. I'd offered something good. She wasn't ready. That was hers to carry, not mine. I no longer counted the days since I left. The calendar became irrelevant. What mattered now is rhythm, peaceful mornings, honest friendships, time spent without tension. I wasn't building a new family. I wasn't chasing a replacement. I was learning how to be enough for myself. And in that, I found a kind of dignity no relationship had ever given me. People say healing isn't linear, and they're right. Some days the anger still knocked. Some nights I still dreamed of the house and woke up panicked. But the difference was, I no longer opened the door. I let those moments pass like weather. I didn't chase them. I didn't feed them. I just breathed, waited, and watched them go. In the end, I didn't get revenge. I didn't get redemption. I got something better, boundaries. And within those boundaries, I found peace. So when people ask if I regretted walking away, cutting ties, selling the house, I just smile. Not out of smugness, but certainty. Because sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to close the door gently, lock it, and walk away without looking back. If this story moved you or reminded you of a moment when you had to choose peace over chaos, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Because sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the deepest healing, and you're not alone in making them. See you soon in the next story.